One in espionage, trust is not a bond. It is a weakness measured, tested, and eventually exploited. By the early 2000s, the Eastern Mediterranean had learned this lesson too well. The sea looked calm to tourists drifting between ports, cameras flashing, laughter echoing across sunlit decks. But beneath that calm ran an invisible war, one waged without uniforms, without declarations, and without mercy. This story begins far from the ferry itself. It begins in southern Beirut, where silence was enforced not by law but by fear. The man Mossad would later call the passenger did not live like a fugitive. He lived like someone who believed history had chosen his side. To Hezbollah he was a commander, disciplined, ideological, operationally gifted. To Israel he was something far more precise, a node, a living junction connecting logistics, weapons transfers, and regional coordination with Iranian handlers. He had survived airstrikes. He had survived purges. He had survived rivals within his own organization. Survival bred arrogance. By the time his name reached the upper floors of Israel's intelligence community, he had already crossed an invisible threshold. He believed himself untouchable. That belief would kill him. Inside a secured Mossad facility north of Tel Aviv, no one spoke his name aloud. They spoke in charts, timelines, movement patterns. A long table filled the room. Around it sat analysts who had not slept properly in weeks. Some were veterans of Lebanon, others were young, raised not on ideology but on data. On the screen, a grainy still frame from a coastal camera, a man stepping off a ferry, civilian clothes, sunglasses, no visible security detail. The analyst controlling the projection didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. "This is the first time in 7 years," he said calmly, "that he has moved without a hardened perimeter." The room did not react. In Mossad, reactions come later, if at all. The inciting incident had occurred months earlier, quietly, in a way intelligence disasters often do. A routine intercept. Signals intelligence pulled from a fiber optic line shared by commercial traffic near the Lebanese coast. Buried among weather data and port schedules was an anomaly, a fragment of encrypted communication routed through an old relay system Hezbollah had supposedly abandoned. It wasn't the content that mattered. It was the routing choice. Someone senior had grown careless. Someone trusted old habits more than new threats. That someone was the passenger. For Mossad, the discovery was not a call to action. It was a call to patience. Israeli doctrine had learned painfully that killing a man too early often revealed more than it solved, so they watched, they mapped, they waited, they reconstructed his life not as a biography but as a pattern of absences. No phone at night, no predictable prayer schedule. A preference for civilian transport, and then an unexpected variable. A ferry. Tourist ferries across the Mediterranean were designed to erase borders. Families moved freely. Retirees wandered decks. Students photographed sunsets they would later forget. To intelligence services, ferries were chaos. Too many civilians, too many cameras, too much noise, which was exactly why the passenger chose them. In Hezbollah's internal culture, paranoia was survival. But paranoia, when unbalanced, curdled into ritual. Routes repeated, cover identities recycled, security measures performed because they always had been, not because they were still effective. The passenger had earned his confidence through years of operational success. He had come to believe a fatal assumption that Mossad preferred distance. He was wrong. In Tel Aviv, a file was opened, not thick, not dramatic. Just a single black stripe across the top, reserved for operations requiring absolute compartmentalization. No names, no paper trails, no visible chain of command. Only one guiding principle was written inside. If he believes he is safest among civilians, that is where we will meet him. Across Europe and the Middle East, secondary players were activated without explanation. A shipping clerk in Cyprus flagged a manifest. A travel agency in Athens confirmed a booking. A dock worker in an unnamed port adjusted a camera angle by 6 degrees. None of them knew why. That was intentional. Meanwhile, the passenger prepared for travel. He did not feel hunted. He felt validated. Movement meant relevance. It meant trust from above. It meant that despite Israel's threats and past assassinations, he was still necessary. He boarded the ferry with a small bag and no weapon. That too was intentional. The ferry pulled away from the dock just after dawn. Engines hummed, water parted, borders dissolved into horizon. Onboard, children ran, couples leaned against rails. A street musician tuned his instrument near the lower deck. And somewhere among them walked men and women who were not tourists at all. They did not watch the passenger directly. They watched reflections, rhythms, distances. In Mossad operations, the most dangerous moment is not the strike. It is the confirmation. Back in Israel, a secure line opened. A single sentence crossed it, coded, unremarkable, devastating. The environment is permissive. No one smiled, no one celebrated, because permissive environments collapse faster than hostile ones. As the ferry moved deeper into open water, the passenger felt something unfamiliar, not fear, not suspicion. A subtle unease, the kind that comes when old instincts whisper but pride tells them to be quiet. He ignored it, men like him always do. In espionage, the shadow does not announce itself. It aligns, it narrows, and when it moves, it does so with precision that feels like fate. The ferry continued its course, and somewhere below deck, a decision made months earlier in silence began its final countdown. Espionage is not about secrets. It is about routines, and the moment someone believes their routine no longer matters. The passenger had crossed borders for most of his adult life. Airports, mountain roads, unmarked crossings at night, every movement rehearsed, every step weighed against risk. This ferry felt different. No armed escort, no convoys, no checkpoints, just people. That was the illusion. On the upper deck, he leaned against the railing, sunglasses shielding his eyes. He watched the water not because it calmed him, but because it gave him something to control: distance, direction, speed. Below him, on the lower deck, a woman adjusted her bag. Inside it, nothing illegal, nothing traceable, nothing that would trigger a search. She was not Mossad's best operative. She was simply the one who fit. Israeli intelligence had learned long ago that visibility kills operations. The best operatives were not the most skilled in combat, but the ones who disappeared into expectation. Tourists, couples, retirees, students, each Mossad asset on board believed they were part of a different operation. One thought this was surveillance. Another believed it was an escort. A third believed nothing at all, just a routine assignment. Only two people knew the full picture. Neither of them were on the ferry. The passenger moved slowly. He avoided patterns but kept habits, choosing seats near exits, scanning reflections in glass, timing his movement to engine noise. Years of discipline had taught him to feel danger. But discipline also teaches you to dismiss false alarms, and this ferry offered too many distractions to separate signal from noise. In Tel Aviv, analysts tracked him not through cameras but through absence. He had not checked in. He had not triggered contingency protocols. He had not altered his route. To Mossad, that was confirmation. The web tightening around him was not made of agents alone. It was made of logistics. A maintenance schedule altered by 15 minutes. A security officer redirected to a different deck. A medical kit stocked with a very specific combination of supplies. Each change was plausible. Each change was deniable. Together they formed a corridor no one could see. Hezbollah's own counterintelligence doctrine had once been formidable. In the years after Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon, paranoia was elevated to an art form, but organizations rot from the top. The passenger had survived so long that younger operatives deferred to him, older rivals feared him, and his Iranian handlers trusted his instincts because they had always worked before. Success is the most dangerous narcotic in intelligence work. Midway through the journey, the passenger went below deck. It was a mistake. The lower levels were crowded, the air stale, tourists queued for food, children pressed against glass panels, and somewhere between the noise and the narrow corridors his situational awareness dulled. He did not notice the man who adjusted his pace to match his. He did not notice the woman who moved ahead and stopped suddenly. He noticed only the inconvenience. The first contact was accidental. A shoulder brushed his, an apology exchanged, nothing more, but contact was never the goal. Calibration was. In espionage tradecraft, proximity reveals more than observation. How someone reacts to minor disruption tells you everything: confidence, awareness, aggression. The passenger's reaction was measured, too measured. He had learned to control instinct, and in doing so revealed that he had something to hide. Elsewhere on the ferry a signal was sent, not digital, not spoken. A man closed a book, that was all. From that moment on, every movement was tracked, not directly. Indirectly, reflections in glass, changes in airflow, the rhythm of footsteps behind him. Mossad did not need to watch him constantly. They needed to know where he was. Back in Israel, a senior officer, one of the few authorized to see the full scope, stood alone in a secure room. He said nothing. He did not issue order, because once an operation reaches this phase, orders become liabilities. The passenger sat at a small table near the cafeteria. He ate slowly. He did not enjoy the food. Something was wrong, not wrong enough to trigger alarm, just wrong enough to irritate him. He blamed the crowd, he blamed fatigue, he blamed complacency. He did not blame Mossad. That was his final miscalculation. The web tightened further with the introduction of human contradiction. A child laughed too loudly. A couple argued nearby. A man dropped a tray. Chaos disguised control. The passenger stood to leave. He did not notice the exit he intended to use had subtly emptied. He did not notice the staff member who lingered too long. He did not notice the absence of uniformed security. In intelligence operations, betrayal is often imagined as a dramatic act, a turncoat, a confession, a gunshot. In reality, betrayal is quieter. It is the moment someone assumes you are protected when in fact you are exposed. As the ferry approached its destination, the passenger felt relief. Relief breeds mistakes. He checked his watch. That was the signal Mossad had been waiting for. Not because of the time, but because it meant he was thinking ahead, not around. In Tel Aviv, the secure line opened again. A second message passed, shorter than the first, colder. He is committed. That was all. Commitment in this context did not mean ideology, it meant trajectory. He had entered a sequence of actions that could not be reversed without drawing attention. He was moving toward an end he did not see. On board, a door closed softly, a corridor emptied, a choice narrowed to seconds. The web was no longer tightening. It was set. And somewhere between the hum of engines and the illusion of safety, the passenger crossed a line that no intelligence service ever marks on a map, the point of no return. In intelligence work, the moment of action is never loud. Loudness attracts witnesses. Witnesses create stories. Stories create consequences. The breach came wrapped in silence. The corridor was narrow, designed to move people efficiently, not to hold them. Fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and recycled breath. The passenger stepped into it without hesitation. That too was a mistake. From behind him, footsteps slowed. From ahead, nothing moved. The ferry continued forward, indifferent. He sensed it then, not fear, not danger, but misalignment. The subtle awareness that his internal map no longer matched reality. He stopped, so did the world around him. In Mossad doctrine, confrontation is avoided until it becomes inevitable. When it arrives, it is brief, contained, and irreversible. There was no shouted command, no weapon drawn, just a voice calm, almost polite. "Excuse me." The passenger turned. He saw nothing threatening. A man. Middle-aged, neutral posture, empty hands. And that was when he understood. Understanding does not arrive as panic, it arrives as clarity. Years of counter-surveillance training collapsed into a single realization. There was no exit. The man stepped closer, not aggressively, professionally. Behind the passenger, a door closed with a soft mechanical click. The sound was final. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. No struggle, no resistance. Not because the passenger lacked the will, but because he lacked the option. In intelligence operations, the most effective weapons are not blades or bullets. They are constraints, space, time, witnesses. The corridor denied him all three. The substance administered was not exotic, not cinematic, not instantly fatal. It was chosen for three reasons: predictability, discretion, plausible medical explanation. Mossad did not want a mystery. They wanted a story that would die quickly. The passenger felt his body betray him before his mind did. Muscles slackened, vision narrowed, the world tilted. The man supported him gently, almost kindly. To anyone watching, it would look like assistance, not elimination. As they moved, another figure emerged briefly, opening a service door, timing precise. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. The choreography had been rehearsed 100 times in rooms far from water, far from civilians, far from consequence. Inside the service area, the passenger collapsed. His breathing was shallow, his pulse irregular, his thoughts fractured. He thought of Beirut, of meetings held in silence, of orders given without hesitation, of the assumption never spoken, always believed, that he was too important to fall like this. The man who knelt beside him checked his vitals. There was no emotion. There never was. Mossad did not assign assassins. They assigned problem solvers. Within minutes, an alarm sounded. Medical emergency. Crew members responded. A crowd gathered. A narrative formed. By the time the ferry docked, the passenger was already dead. The cause, according to preliminary reports, sudden cardiac failure, stress-related, tragic, unremarkable. In Tel Aviv, confirmation arrived through a channel so quiet it bordered on superstition. No report, no celebration, just a file marked closed. The breach had not been violent, it had been surgical. A single life removed without disturbing the body politic around it. That was the point, but breaches are never contained to their immediate effect. They echo, they expose, they destabilize assumptions far beyond their point of origin. In Hezbollah's command structure, confusion followed almost immediately. Calls unanswered, orders delayed, decisions deferred. A void does not need to be announced, it reveals itself. And somewhere far from the ferry, a superior who had trusted the passengers stared at a map and realized something had gone terribly wrong. Not because a man was dead, but because control had been lost. The breach was complete, the damage irreversible, and the war beneath the surface had just entered a far more dangerous phase. In covert war, death is rarely the loudest event. The loudest event is what comes after the silence, the suspicion, the internal collapse of trust. A commander can be replaced, but the belief that you are protected, once shattered, it never returns the same. When the ferry's doors opened and passengers poured into the port like water released from a lock, no one understood what had truly happened. There were no gunshots, no blood, no masked men running. There was only a stretcher, a small cluster of crew members, and a rumor spreading through a crowd that would forget it by nightfall. A tourist collapsed. A man had a heart attack, a tragedy at sea. In the public world, it was nothing. In the intelligence world, it was an earthquake. Hezbollah learned about the death the way organizations like it always do, through fragmented alarms, not official notice. A liaison missed a call. A scheduled check-in never arrived. A handler waited too long before speaking the words out loud. He's gone. At first they assumed detention, then an accident, then slowly the one explanation that made everyone feel cold: he had been reached. Reached not in Beirut, not in a safe house, not in the shadows of the southern suburbs, reached in daylight among civilians where he believed himself untouchable. Within hours internal communications hardened, not with grief, with suspicion. In Hezbollah's upper structure, grief was private. Suspicion was policy. Meeting rooms closed, phones were abandoned, trusted couriers were suddenly treated like liabilities. Men who had survived years of war began looking at each other differently, not as comrades but as potential leaks. Because the question was not how did he die, the question was who gave him away. In Tel Aviv the reaction was equally controlled. There were no triumphant briefings, no senior officials standing at podiums, no flags raised. Just quiet acknowledgments in secured rooms. Analysts updated risk models. Case officers checked exposure lists. The people who had contributed to the operation, directly or indirectly, were not congratulated. They were protected, and protection in intelligence culture looks like erasure. Names removed from internal system. Communications buried under noise. Temporary relocation orders issued for assets who might suddenly become visible. In covert war, success does not end danger. It redistributes it. Across the region, political currents shifted with the subtlety of a knife under a coat. On one side, Israeli leadership, publicly silent, privately aware that this death would trigger retaliation cycles they could not fully predict. On the other, Hezbollah's leadership, publicly defiant, privately wounded, because this was not just a loss, it was an insult. An assassination on land could be framed as war. But an elimination on a civilian route, under cover of normal life, was something else entirely. It said, we can reach you anywhere. In Beirut, a closed-door gathering took place within 48 hours. No phones, no recording devices, no casual conversation. A senior figure spoke first, voice low, controlled. This wasn't random, he said. This wasn't fate. He let the silence stretch, because silence is pressure. Someone mapped him. Another voice, older, sharper, cut through. Then someone knew. That sentence changed the room, because now they weren't discussing Israel, they were discussing themselves. The internal purge began the way it always begins, not with executions but with question. Who booked the travel? Who confirmed the route? Who knew the identity documents used? Who knew the precise day? Men who had been trusted for years were suddenly interrogated like strangers. Personal histories reopened, old rivalries repurposed as evidence. In the spy world, paranoia does not need proof, it needs a trigger. And the passenger's death was the perfect trigger. Meanwhile, in Israel, a separate kind of fallout unfolded. Mossad had solved a problem, removed a commander who connected networks, moved resources, coordinated plans. But solving one problem creates another. What happens when the enemy panics? Panic is unpredictable, and unpredictability is the most dangerous thing in the region. In the weeks that followed, intelligence channels filled with noise. Hezbollah's communications shifted rapidly, abandoning old systems, rotating codes, cutting off habitual routes. That change was expected, but what worried analysts was not the change, it was the speed of it. An organization does not pivot that quickly unless it believes it has been penetrated deeply. And when an organization believes it has been penetrated, it does what wounded creatures do. It lashes out. Retaliation planning ignited behind closed doors. Targets were discussed, some symbolic, some operational. But symbolism is expensive in covert war. A symbolic target brings headlines, headlines bring pressure, pressure brings mistakes. Hezbollah's decision-makers knew this, so they faced a strategic dilemma, cold and bitter: strike back loudly and risk exposure, strike back quietly and risk appearing weak. In their world, weakness is oxygen for rivals. Inside a Mossad division responsible for operational security, the mood remained grim. An officer, one of the few who had been involved early, spoke to a smaller circle. "In this world," he said, "loyalty isn't devotion, it's discipline." He didn't say it like a quote, he said it like a warning, because discipline was what kept an operation clean, and discipline was what kept the operatives who executed it alive afterward. Somewhere else away from the operational rooms, another conversation took place, one never written down. Two officials discussed the moral echo of it, not whether it was justified, not whether it was legal. Those debates existed, but they were not the ones that mattered inside the machine. The question that mattered was simpler: how many civilians were close enough to witness it? Because every civilian is a potential leak, every leak is a potential scandal, and every scandal is a political event. In intelligence work, the battlefield is not just geography, it is perception. As news of the death spread in Hezbollah-aligned circles, the story evolved, because truth in covert war is never allowed to remain plain. Some claimed it was a medical accident, others claimed a traitor poisoned him. Some insisted it was an Israeli strike from a distance, technology so advanced it sounded like myth. Each story served a purpose. Each story kept the organization from confronting the most painful truth: that Mossad did not need magic, they needed access. And access implies something terrifying: that the passenger's world, his routines, his confidences, his internal systems had been readable, not guessed, not assumed. Read. The passenger's family, if they were told anything at all, were given a version of the truth that would not endanger the living. That is the cruelty of this world. Death is clean, the aftermath is what cuts. In Hezbollah's hierarchy, the passenger's death created a vacuum. Vacuums do not remain empty, they fill with ambition. Young commanders saw opportunity, older commanders saw threats. Iranian handlers saw disruption, an interruption in a pipeline they had invested years in shaping. And disruption invites punishment, not always from an enemy, sometimes from your own side. The passenger's immediate circle began disappearing into internal custody. Not all were guilty. In covert war, guilt is not the first requirement. Fear is. Fear produces confessions. Confessions produce narratives. Narratives restore control. At least that is the theory. In Tel Aviv, intelligence professionals watched the enemy's internal turbulence with cold patience. They did not celebrate the panic, they measured it, because panic can be harvested. Disarray creates openings. Openings create leverage. Leverage changes outcomes. But there was another layer to the fallout, one that intelligence institutions rarely admit publicly. The protagonist of this operation, the unseen network, the analysts, the handlers, the invisible people who made it possible, felt no satisfaction. They felt pressure. Because they understood the final law of covert war: every successful strike teaches your enemy how you think. And once they learn how you think, they begin building their defenses around your psychology. In the months that followed, Hezbollah's doctrine hardened. Movement became more restrictive. Civilian cover became less trusted. Internal security grew sharper, more suffocating. And in that tightening, something shifted inside the organization. They began to fear not just Mossad, but each other. That was the true fallout, not one dead commander, but an erosion of internal trust so severe that it would poison decisions for years. In spy war history, that is sometimes more valuable than any single elimination. Because you can kill a man once, but if you fracture an organization's confidence, it keeps bleeding long after the body is gone. History rarely remembers the quiet moments. It remembers explosions, declarations, names carved into stone. But the events that truly change the balance of power often pass without witnesses, registered only in classified files, internal doctrines, and the altered behavior of those who survived them. The ferry continued running its route long after the passenger's death. Tourists boarded, photographs were taken, the sea remained indifferent, and yet nothing about that corridor was ever the same again. Years later, fragments of the operation surfaced, not in headlines but in whispers. A retired analyst speaking off the record, a former operative choosing his words carefully in an academic forum, a footnote in a regional security study that hinted at a maritime incident without elaboration. No official acknowledgement ever came, it never would, because acknowledgement would mean admission, and admission would mean precedent. Within Mossad, the operation did not receive a name. Names create mythology, mythology attracts attention. Instead, it became a case study, taught quietly to new officers not as a triumph but as a warning. Never assume your enemy prefers distance. Never assume civilians create safety. Never assume success will protect you from complacency. The lesson was not about assassination. It was about psychology. Doctrine shifted. Hezbollah operatives traveling under civilian cover became more suspicious. Movement among non-combatants was no longer considered safe by default. That change alone altered logistics across the region. Routes lengthened, delays multiplied, coordination frayed, small changes, cumulative damage. For Hezbollah, the passenger's absence was felt long after his name stopped being spoken. His replacement struggled, not because he lacked ability, but because he lacked confidence. Confidence, once lost at the top, never fully returns. Orders were second-guessed, meetings postponed. Travel avoided. An organization built on ideological certainty began acting like one under siege, which in a way it was. Years later, an intelligence historian would describe the incident with unusual restraint. This was not a decapitation strike, he wrote. It was a trust strike. That sentence captured what missiles never could. Across the broader intelligence world, rivals took note. MI6 analysts quietly updated risk models. CIA regional desks reconsidered assumptions about civilian transit zones. Even adversarial services like the IRGC's intelligence arm began altering maritime protocols. Because the message was clear to anyone who understood covert war, there is no neutral space. As for the operatives involved, their lives returned to routine. New assignments, new identities, new silences. They did not speak of the ferry, they did not speak of the man. And they certainly did not speak of the moment when history shifted without applause. That is the price of precision. One of them, years later, long removed from the service, was asked a question during a private interview. Did it change anything? He paused, not for drama, for accuracy. It changed how they sleep, he finally said. That was all. The passenger became a footnote, not because he was unimportant, but because intelligence work erases its subjects as thoroughly as its agents. Names fade. Patterns remain, the ferry sails on. The sea absorbs secrets without judgment. And somewhere in archives sealed for decades, the full account rests, waiting not for revelation, but for relevance. Because in the spy world, truth is not released when it is known, it is released when it is useful. In espionage, empires do not fall from force alone, they fall from silence. From the quiet realization that someone has seen too much and acted without hesitation. And when that happens, no amount of ideology can restore what was lost. This was not a story about death. It was a story about control. And how easily control dissolves when trust becomes paranoia. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more declassified stories from the spy who erased.